Imagine that someone you love, someone you've trusted all your life, one day turns on you and tells you, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." Imagine if that person says it to you not once, not twice, but 3 times, and you actually worried that they meant it. My brother Cory began using drugs in his early teens. At first, it was just the occasional joint, but as he got older, things progressed to the point that he was getting high every day, isolating himself in his room, even slept through a family Christmas gathering. Now, as his older brother, who loved him deeply, I never wanted to rat him out because I didn't want him to think that my disapproving of his drug use was a disapproval of him. But when he was clearly headed for the pits, I couldn't just stand there and watch. So I told my parents, and they confronted him. And what ensued after that was the most difficult collective hell that our family had ever experienced, as my brother insisted on his unfettered right to do drugs, much to all of our chagrin. Now, as his older brother of 22 months and sharing many of the same friends as he did and sharing the same bathroom with him, I was in a position to know when he was doing drugs and not approving of his self-destructive habit. I would tell my parents, and as a consequence, he unleashed a particular fury on me. I remember once dropping him off at work one day with specific instructions from my parents to pick him up when he's done with work, and to tell them if he was not present when I picked him up. And when I dropped him off, I remember him looking at me and telling me that he was not going to be coming home, and that if I ever told Mom and Dad that he didn't come home, that he would fucking kill me. And I remember driving home that night in tears, pulling over on the side of the road, and desperately hoping that a cop would flag me down, or just somebody would come who I could talk to and describe to them the hurt that it felt to have your life threatened by your very own brother. I remember another experience after that whenever I was sitting in the living room with my sister watching the news, and I heard in the background my brother berating my mother for not giving him her cell phone, which he wanted to go rendezvous with some friends and do drugs. And not wanting to get involved, I tried to stay out and just kept watching TV. But when I heard scuffling in the laundry room and my mom yelling, "Don't touch me," I couldn't stay out because I had no idea to what extent my brother would go to satisfy his craving. And so instinct kicked in, and I got up and I ran towards him, and I looked at the closest object I could find, his science textbook, this thick IPC hardcover book, and I grabbed it and I threw it at him and I tackled him, and he squirreled away and swung at me and missed and then ran out the door, all the while my sister yelling, "I hate you, Cory, I hate you." And I chased him and tried to see where he was going, and as he saw me, he yelled at me, "Get the fuck away, I'm gonna fucking kill you." And as I heard him scream that, I backed off and walked back home, seeing that there were young toddlers down the street playing in the cul-de-sac and not wanting to make a scene in front of them. That night, I remember my dad took me to an AA meeting where I remember his sponsor telling me, "You know, it takes a really strong man to defend your mother like that." And when he said that, I cried because I never wanted to be in the position to have to defend my mother against my very own brother. After that experience, I moved out of the house to live with a friend, not wanting to, not feeling safe around my brother. And, but I would come home from time to time to get things, and one of those times coming home, I found drugs that my brother had squirreled away in the bathroom, and I told my parents about them. The next day, my brother came up to me in theater class and pushed me, like a bully pushing a runt, and said, "Do you want me to fuck you up?" And I, not wanting to make a scene in school, played the fool. And he just looked at me and scowled and said, "If I ever find out that you told Mom and Dad about the drugs, I'm gonna fucking kill you." And after that class, I quickly called my parents and told them that they had to come and pick him up, and they came. But he knew that he had done something big and had already walked out of school. Shortly thereafter, the police found him and arrested him for truancy and sent him to a juvenile detention center, where my parents, with the help of a judge, were able to get him remanded to a long-term drug rehab several hours away from our house. And I didn't see him for some weeks until we visited him for family weekend at this long-term drug rehab. And I remember going to family therapy session with him, with his counselor, Judy, who was this big, hefty, no-nonsense black woman. She'd seen it all, done it all. She'd done drugs, been in prison, endured untold family strife. And she just let loose on him. And she said, "You look at your brother, and you look at the hurt on his face." And she didn't stop there. She wanted him to break, and she made him. She didn't stop until he was in tears. And she said, "I'm not gonna let you off the hook because this is your brother." And he looked at her and said, "Frankly, Judy, I don't want to be left off the hook." And I remember when I heard that, I realized how serious of a problem he was dealing with. He wasn't just dealing with a simple bad habit that he couldn't kick. He was dealing with an addiction so strong that it bound chains on him, chains of steel, that could take hold of him and influence him to do things he didn't want to do, even when he thought he was free. And so, even though I forgave him after that experience, I distanced myself from him, not wanting to experience the hurt that I experienced while he was on drugs and under the influence of addiction. So when we got older and left the house for college, we sort of lost contact with each other as he battled with periods of sobriety and relapsing. And we would maybe see each other once or twice a year when I would come home for Christmas or summer vacation, but we would never talk on the phone. When my mom would tell me about him, how he was, what he was doing in life, I would never dare ask questions because I didn't want to risk knowing that he was back on drugs, because to know that he was back on drugs, or even the hint of him being back on drugs, was like handling bleach with an open wound. And I wasn't ready for that, for those wounds to be made any worse. And so I avoided him, and eventually my brother got arrested. And as difficult as that was to know that my brother was spending time behind bars, we actually were able to reconnect while he was in prison over handwritten letters. And as we wrote to each other, I was able to express to him the hurt that I endured while he was under the influence and of addiction, and he in turn was able to ask pardon of me and help to get back on his feet. And as we continued to write handwritten letters to each other and reconcile through these letters, I realized that something was missing in this experience, and that to really have a true healing, we had to have an experience in person to bring us together. And so towards the end of his prison sentence, I proposed that we walk the way of St. James, or El Camino de Santiago. And as a Spanish major, I learned about the Way of St. James from a Spanish professor, and actually walked it with my wife for our honeymoon. The Way of St. James is an ancient pilgrimage that has been going on since before the Middle Ages, 500 miles across the Iberian Peninsula to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, where the body of St. James the Apostle is thought to be buried. And having walked the Way of St. James before, I knew that it would offer me and my brother the perfect opportunity, what we needed to reconcile. We would be able to just carry our backpacks every day and just have to worry about where we slept or where we ate, and not be distracted by technology or by other distractions in a more sort of civilized environment that could draw us away from each other. And it would offer us nature and simplicity so we could just focus on each other and that much needed healing that needed to happen. And so after he finished his prison sentence, a couple months later, we walked the primitive Way of St. James. Now, this was a slightly different route that we took than the much more traveled French route, Way of St. James. And we actually departed from a city called Oviedo in the mountains of Asturias, in the north, very north of Spain. And I remember as we departed Oviedo under sunny blue skies, looking at the and beautiful snow-capped mountains, and realizing as we walked with this sort of newfound peace with each other that something was different. And I remember pulling out my guidebook when we were walking, and pulling out the place marker in my guidebook, which was this little devotional card of a Spanish-looking Virgin Mary. And I remember looking at that devotional card and at first being a little weirded out because the priest in Oviedo had given it to me after I had expressed to him my worries about my future with my brother, and whether we would really be able to reconcile after our tumultuous past. And but after thinking about why he gave that to me, I couldn't stop thinking about the words that he said to me. He told me, just like you carry your backpack every day, so too will you carry the burden of your brother. But remember, every day is a new stage. And he used an interesting word for the word stage. He used the Spanish word etapa, which means a stage or a discrete period. But for pilgrims, an etapa it refers to a particular pilgrim experience of getting from point A to point B in a day. And where you start, it's where you start in the morning to where you finish at night. And for a pilgrim, every etapa is different. There are no two etapas that are the same. And every day that you walk, you're going to find a different set of physical challenges, a different encounter with history, and different emotional challenges. And when I thought about Father's words that he said before he gave me that card, I realized that he wasn't just trying to tell me about some local cult. He was trying to draw me out of myself and tell me to live right now with my brother and not worry about our future. And so as I realized that, I walked towards Santiago with a much greater peace with him. But then came disagreement. We were in a town called San Román de Retorta, and he wanted to walk towards a town called Melide, and I wanted to walk to a town called Acejas. Now this was more than just a simple difference of preferences. This was a difference in character of the way that we were going to walk. Because once we got to Melide, we were going to join routes with the much more traveled French route that is not only, has 10, 20, 100 times more traffic, but is much more touristy, much more urban in some ways, and much less serene than the peaceful, tranquil walk that we had in uninhabited pastures in the mountains of Asturias. And I wasn't ready for that kind of change of scenery. And so I didn't want to go there yet. But when I realized that this was a genuine difference of opinions that we were going to have to work through discussion and maybe even argument, I let it go. I dropped it because I didn't want to risk an argument with him that could incite his anger that had been so hurtful to me. So as we walked along that day, we eventually got to the point of the town that I wanted to stay in, and I proposed that we stop at a bar for some coffee and water. And as we sat in that bar, I remember going through the words in my head of what I was going to say to him to try to convince him that we needed to stay there. And as I thought of that, I couldn't stop getting out of my mind that memory of that scuffle we had in the laundry room and of the hateful words that he said to me. And I hesitated to say anything to him out of fear of inciting that anger that had hurt so much. But as I thought about it more, I pulled out my guidebook to look at what was lying ahead, and I pulled out that note card again, and Father's words came to mind. Every day is a new etapa. And as those words came to mind, I realized that there was some reason behind what Cory said. He wasn't just being hard-headed. He actually wanted to keep walking because the day was early and there was plenty of sunshine and we had plenty of energy. And it was only right to follow the natural rhythm of our bodies. And I realized that to follow today's etapa meant to go to Melide and to actually encounter whatever that entailed. And so I went with him. And as we walked to Melide under bright shining sun, I remember taking my backpack off and taking the clothes off of my backpack. I had clothespined my clothes onto the outside of my backpack after I had washed them the night before so that they could dry off under the sun. And I remember as I folded those clothes and put them into my backpack and put my backpack back on, realizing that my backpack was a little bit lighter than it was earlier in the day. And just then it occurred to me that just as the sun had evaporated the water in my clothes and made my load lighter, so too did I need to let my worries about my past evaporate and to live with my brother right here, right now. And so we walked to Santiago with a newfound peace, living in the moment with him, each moment as we walked there. But when we got to Santiago, again, I experienced another moment of doubt. Whenever we were in the Hostal de los Reyes Católicos, the Hotel of the Catholic Kings, we were having coffee, and I remember him telling me how much he had missed me over those times that we had been apart, and either by physical or emotional distance. And I never really knew how much he had missed me while he was struggling. As he said that to me, for a moment, I worried that perhaps a chasm too big had been put between us over this time, and maybe we wouldn't be able to actually fully reconcile when we got back. And so I remember thinking the next day when we were walking to catch the bus to their airport, it was early in the morning, and looking at the stars of Santiago glimmer, thinking how long the light had traveled from those stars to reach my eyes. Maybe it was 5, maybe it was 10, maybe it was 15 years. And yet we had just walked across the Asturian mountains, and we were together almost as if nothing had happened. And just as I was thinking that, I got onto the bus, and the bus lights obscured for the last time for me the brilliant stars of the Campos Estela, they say, of Santiago de Compostela. And getting in there for a second, I thought maybe because our Camino is over, that's the end of our reconciliation. But then Father's words came to mind. Every day is a new etapa. And so we began the next day's etapa. Thank you.